The basement door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking echoed clearly through the darkness. Laura slid down onto the cold steps, her hand gripping tightly onto James's thin arm as cold sweat rolled from her forehead down to her neck. Both of them stayed silent, hearing only each other's heavy breathing. Suddenly, in the stillness of the night, James leaned closer and whispered softly into Laura's ear. "Stay quiet. They have no idea what is hidden behind that wall." Laura could not believe what she had just heard. The son she had loved and sacrificed her whole life for had locked her and her husband inside this freezing basement. Dylan, the boy she had raised since he was tiny, had now become a complete stranger. The feeling of betrayal surged through her heart like a fierce flame, yet in this dark night, the pain passed through her like a drifting wind, unable to weaken her. She looked at James, the man she had shared her life with for so many years, and felt a strange strength coming from him. "We were wrong, weren't we?" Laura asked softly, her voice weak, as if she feared that speaking louder would make the truth even worse. James remained silent, his dim eyes seeming to follow a distant memory somewhere far away. For the first time, Laura realized that he was no longer the strong husband she had always known. Yet in this moment, there was something different in his eyes, a strange calmness. "Laura, I have a secret I have kept for 40 years, James whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. Those words struck like lightning tearing through the darkness, sweeping away all the doubt and pain in Laura's heart. "What secret?" she asked, unable to contain the mixture of curiosity and fear. She felt as if her whole world was slowly collapsing. James did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly sat up, the exhaustion on his face clear. "We are not the people they think we are." Suddenly, Laura felt her head spin. She stepped back as if trying to keep distance between herself and the truth James was about to reveal. "What are you talking about?" she said, unable to believe her own ears. James sighed, his eyes resting on the old wooden boards in the basement. "I am not the biological son of the Du Bois family. I was adopted, the son of another man, Orion Thorne." Laura could not believe what she had just heard. Every word from James felt like a devastating blow to everything she had believed in for the past 40 years. "Orion Thorne?" she stammered, her eyes wide as if searching for a reason to deny it. James nodded, his gaze sinking into dark memories. "Langston Du Bois himself adopted me after my father, Orion, was rejected and destroyed by the government. He was a brilliant scientist, but the authorities falsely accused him of being a traitor." Shocked, Laura collapsed onto the floor. She could not understand any of this. Everything she had known about James, about the Du Bois family, now felt like nothing but illusions. She felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare where everything was being torn apart piece by piece. "So everything I built, everything I believed in all these years was just a lie?" Laura choked back tears, her eyes filling with water. "James, why didn't you tell me?" James looked at her, his face tired yet steady. "Because I was afraid that if you knew we would lose everything, afraid that we would never be able to go back." He took Laura's hand, his fingers cold and trembling. "But now that they have pushed us this far, I have no choice left but to tell you the truth." The pain inside Laura felt like a burning fire consuming everything she once thought was certain. She did not know what to feel, confusion, anger, or simply emptiness with nothing left but endless doubt. After a long silence, Laura finally sighed and asked, "So what do we do now?" Her voice was calmer, yet her hands were still tightly clenched together. She knew that their family had now stepped into a battle they could not retreat from. Everything had changed, and the price to pay was not only the house, but everything they had built over so many years. "We must take back justice," James replied, his voice burning like fire in the dark night. "We cannot let them take everything, and I will do whatever it takes to protect you and our family." Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with tears but also with determination. They had been betrayed, but in this very moment, she realized that they were the ones who truly held the power. She herself, the woman who had always been underestimated, would be the one to lead this family back onto the right path, and their battle had only just begun. Laura sat motionless on the stair, the faint light slipping through the crack of the basement door shining down and making the wooden boards beneath her feet glow softly in the darkness. She looked at James, the man she had lived beside for so many years, who was no longer the strong husband she had once loved. He sat next to her, his eyes cloudy, his face wrinkled by time and exhaustion. Yet within those eyes, Laura noticed something she had never seen before. A strange firmness. We are not the people they think we are. James's words cut into Laura's heart like a blade, severing the threads that had once seemed to bind her forever to the sweet memories of their family. Everything she had believed in, everything she had devoted to the Du Bois family, now felt like ashes crushed beneath a secret she had never imagined could exist. "So you are not really a son of the Du Bois family?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. Tears she could not hold back filling her eyes. "James, all those years, everything I sacrificed, none of it was the truth?" James did not answer immediately. He lowered his head, his trembling hands gripping the old coat he was wearing. "Laura, you cannot understand. If I had told the truth from the beginning, we would have lost everything. Do you know that Langston adopted me not simply out of kindness? He was the only one brave enough to protect a child without parents, the only one willing to stand against the system without fearing the price he might have to pay." A cold gust of wind slipped through the crack of the door, leaving both of them silent for a moment. Laura closed her eyes, trying to picture the years she and James had spent building their family, building this house, only to discover that it had all been built on a foundation of deception. What hurt even more was that this truth came from the very man she had trusted. "Then why did you never tell me?" Laura asked softly, her voice gentler now, filled with wounded pain. "You knew I would forgive you, didn't you? But you still kept it from me. Why?" James looked at her, and his eyes were no longer empty as before. "I was afraid. I was afraid that if you knew, you would not be able to endure it. I was afraid you would leave me, afraid you would never look at me the same way again. And I did not want to lose you, Laura. I did not want to lose you while I could still keep you by my side." Laura listened to those words, yet the feeling of betrayal did not disappear so easily. Her heart felt as if it were being crushed. His explanation could not change the truth that she had been deceived for so many years. She had poured all her love and devotion into nurturing this family, only to discover now that the family she believed in was not what she had thought it was. Confusion overwhelmed her entire being, a pain rising like waves that swept everything away. How could she forgive someone who had hidden such a massive truth, someone who had lived beside her without ever sharing such an important part of his life? "James, now that everything has been revealed, what do you want to do? I may be able to forgive, but how can we go on?" Laura asked, her eyes full of pain, yet also holding a quiet strength. James lowered his head, his gaze fading into the darkness. "We must take everything back, this house and everything that belongs to us. We cannot let Dylan and Sophie, the ones who deceived us, take it all." Laura looked at her husband, and suddenly a faint spark of hope lit in her eyes, though her heart was still heavy with worry. Yes, they had to reclaim what was theirs. But did they truly have the strength to stand against Dylan and Sophie's greed and schemes? She did not know, but she could not endure this any longer. She had to do something. At that very moment, a sound from above made both of them startle. The footsteps of Dylan and Sophie echoed from the staircase above, light but full of authority. They had returned, completely unaware that the secrets they believed would remain hidden forever had now been revealed. "James, I will not let them win," Laura said firmly, her voice filled with determination. "You and I will start again together." James lifted his head and looked at her, a glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes, as if for the first time in many years he no longer felt alone. The atmosphere in the dark basement now felt heavier, not because of the darkness, but because of the change within Laura's heart. She knew the battle ahead was not only about protecting the house or their property, it was about defending the honor and the values of their family. She was no longer the gentle mother, the enduring wife. She was a warrior, and now she would do everything to reclaim what she deserved. "We will start again. We will take everything back," Laura declared, her eyes blazing with a fierce and unbreakable fire. The atmosphere in the basement remained dark and heavy, with only faint streaks of light slipping through the crack of the door and falling across the cold stone floor. Laura sat quietly beside James, the chill of the place seeming to seep into her body. Yet inside her heart, she felt a powerful change taking place. She no longer felt helpless. The truth James had just revealed struck her like a shock that awakened everything she had forgotten for so many years. Even though she was trapped inside this dark basement, a fierce and determined fire was now burning within her soul. "We cannot just sit here forever," Laura said, her voice firm, no longer carrying any trace of the weakness she had shown before. "We need to act now. We cannot allow Dylan and Sophie to keep deceiving us." She tightened her grip on James's hand, a strange sense of confidence and strength rising within her, making her forget the feelings of abandonment and betrayal. Laura understood that this moment would shape the future of her family, that every decision she made now would determine what lay ahead. James sighed, his eyes fading into the darkness, yet his hands held Laura's firmly, as if trying to give her strength. "You are right. I will not let them take everything from us. No matter how hard the fight may be, we have lived for this family for far too long to give up so easily." Laura looked at her husband and felt the determination in his eyes. But deep inside her heart, there were still worries that could not be silenced. Did they truly have the strength to confront Dylan, the son she had spent her entire life raising, and Sophie, the wife she had never truly trusted? The two of them had grown accustomed to wealth and power. Could a family like theirs really stand against people whose greed had clouded their judgment? The question circled endlessly in Laura's mind, yet she knew that if she did not act now, everything would slip away forever. She could not allow the son she had raised to destroy everything she and James had built through so many years of dedication. "We will need help," Laura said, determination clear in her voice. "We cannot do this alone. We need to find a good lawyer, someone who can help us fight the forged documents they are using." James nodded, his eyes pausing for a moment as if considering something carefully. "I know someone. That person can help us. I met her when I was still working, a very sharp lawyer who specializes in inheritance and family assets." "Then we will contact her immediately. Let her help us," Laura said firmly. "But we also need to prepare ourselves. Dylan and Sophie will not give up easily. They will do anything to take this house." Before she could say more, the sound of footsteps echoed again from the staircase above, this time no longer gentle as before. Dylan and Sophie had returned. They had no idea that everything had changed, that their lives would never be the same again. The basement door opened, and Dylan stood there with the same cold expression he always wore. Sophie stood beside him, her eyes filled with challenge. "It seems the two of you have had time to think, haven't you?" Dylan said calmly, though his tone carried a quiet arrogance. "Mom, Dad, you can stay here and think as long as you want, but I will not wait forever. We need this house to develop our careers." Laura slowly stood up, and there was no longer any weakness or worry in her eyes. She looked directly at Dylan without the slightest hint of fear. "Do not even dream about it. What you need is not this house. It is the truth. You have deceived us for far too long." Dylan raised an eyebrow, surprised but not particularly concerned. "Mom, do not make this difficult. All you have to do is sign the papers and everything will be finished. After that, things will become simple. I will take care of everything." "No," Laura replied firmly. "You cannot deceive me forever. I know everything you have done, and I will not allow you to take the family's property like this." Sophie let out a mocking laugh and looked at Laura with open contempt. "Mother, I think you are too old to understand how this works. This is our business. All you need to do is stay quiet and let us handle it." Laura did not respond, but a powerful silence filled the space around them. She knew exactly what needed to be done. She could no longer live in a family where respect had disappeared. Every word spoken by Sophie and Dylan felt like blades cutting into her heart. Yet instead of pain, she felt only the cold clarity of reason. She was no longer the gentle mother or the patient wife. "Then we will meet in the courtroom," Laura said, her voice steady and fearless. "I will not allow you to control everything simply because you believe you can." Dylan stared at his mother for a long moment before slowly stepping back. He said nothing more, but the arrogance in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a hint of doubt. Sophie stood frozen, her face pale, unsure of what to do. Both of them were shocked by Laura's powerful transformation. They could no longer look at her as a weak old mother. She had become a woman of strength, and suddenly, they were the ones who seemed vulnerable. Laura turned and looked into James's eyes. "We will start again. We cannot allow them to destroy this family any further." James looked back at her, his eyes shining with determination. They would not stop until they had won. The basement remained silent, with only the sound of James and Laura breathing echoing through the still air, as if time itself had stopped. Laura felt the cold seeping through her skin, wave after wave of chill spreading through her body, yet inside her heart she no longer felt cold. Everything had become clear. Nothing could make her step back now. She knew the battle had begun, and even if she had to sacrifice everything, she would not lose. "We cannot just sit here forever," Laura said, her voice firm as steel, filled with strength. "We have to find a way out. We have to find someone who can help us." James looked at his wife, his eyes filled with exhaustion, but also with determination. "I know a lawyer who can help us. She is very good, and she can fight the fake documents that Dylan and Sophie have tried to create. But it will not be easy, Laura. They will not give up easily." Laura nodded, fully prepared to face whatever might come. "I am not afraid. If necessary, we will do everything we can to take back what belongs to us." James looked at her, his eyes filled with admiration and emotion. "You have changed, Laura. You are stronger than ever, and I will stand beside you until the end." Those words of encouragement burned like a flame in Laura's heart, lighting every corner of her mind. She no longer felt weak, no longer felt crushed by betrayal. Instead, she felt strength rising from that very pain. Everything inside her had changed. Family was not a place of endless sacrifice. It was a place where truth must be respected, where those who love one another must protect each other and never allow themselves to be used. As the two of them stood up, Laura and James turned their eyes toward the basement door. They both knew that once they stepped out of that place, they would not only be fighting to reclaim the house, they would also be fighting to restore the honor and justice of their family. With determination in their hearts, Laura and James began making their plan. They needed to find a way to confront Dylan and Sophie, and most importantly, they had to gather proof showing that the documents presented by them were forged. Laura knew they could not rely only on feelings or fairness. They needed strategy and solid evidence. Laura decided to contact the lawyer James had once mentioned, the one who could help them in this legal battle. She searched online for information about the lawyer, and after a short time, she found the woman's phone number. Even though everything was still uncertain, Laura felt an urgent need to act immediately. She had to seek help from outside, from someone who could expose the deception. When she called the lawyer, her voice remained steady without the slightest hesitation. "Hello, my name is Laura Dubois. I need your help with a very serious legal matter involving my family's property. If you are able to assist us, I would be very grateful." The lawyer on the other end of the line was silent for a moment before replying, "Mrs. Dubois, I understand your situation. I will come today. We need to act quickly." After that call, Laura felt a small weight lift from her chest. But she could not stop thinking about Dylan and Sophie. She imagined their smiling faces as they tried to take everything from the family, believing they could easily manipulate the situation. But she would not allow that to happen. When she turned back to look at James, he was sitting in the dark corner of the basement, his hands holding his head as he stared into the distance. Laura walked over and sat beside him. "We will never lose," she said firmly. "I will fight, and you will too." James looked at her, and in his eyes, Laura saw a determination she had never seen before. "I will not give up, Laura. You have helped me stand up so many times in my life. Now I will do the same for you." Laura felt a powerful wave of love and support from James. In that moment, she no longer felt alone. The two of them had been pushed to the edge, yet they would not step back. They would not allow Dylan and Sophie to take their house, and they would not allow deception to win. When the lawyer came to meet them later that afternoon, everything had already been prepared. She was a middle-aged woman, confident and sharp. As soon as she stepped into the house, she sensed the tension in the air. "What is the situation?" she asked as soon as she sat down. Laura looked at her with determined eyes. We need to reclaim ownership of this house. Dylan and Sophie have forged documents. We must expose everything. The lawyer nodded. I will help you do that. But first we need to gather every piece of evidence possible. Do you have any documents that prove those papers are fake? Laura and James exchanged a glance. Then Laura stood up and walked to the table near the window and took out some old documents. She handed the lawyer a copy of the original will that Langston Dubois had left to James, along with the papers related to the ownership of the house. The lawyer looked through the documents carefully and then placed them down on the table. We will proceed step by step. Do not worry. Everything will be all right. Looking at the lawyer's face, Laura felt a new spark of hope rising within her. This was the path she and James would walk together, not only to reclaim their house, but also to restore the justice and respect they deserved. The sun slowly set, leaving the house wrapped in a gloomy silence, like the stillness before a storm. Laura and James sat in the living room, each in a different corner, their eyes not meeting, yet both lost in deep thought. Over the past few days, the atmosphere in the house had felt like a tightly stretched string, an invisible tension covering everything. Even so, Laura no longer felt powerless. She was no longer the weak woman trapped between family and obligation. Something inside her had changed, and in that moment, she knew the battle ahead would not be easy, but at least she would not face it alone. What do you think we should do next? James finally asked, his voice low and heavy from days of worry and tension. Laura did not answer immediately. She remained silent for a long moment, as if carefully considering every step that lay ahead. She had endured too much pain and too much betrayal over the years. But now, that feeling had faded, replaced by a calm and determined coldness. She had to do everything to protect her family and to defend what she had built over so many years. We need to keep the documents that the lawyer took completely secret. Do not let Dylan and Sophie know what we have in our hands. And there is one more thing. We must find clearer evidence that they forged those papers. James lifted his eyes to look at his wife. This time, there was no confusion in his gaze, only determination. Have you thought this through? They will not leave us alone. We must prepare carefully. Laura nodded. We need time, but things will move quickly. I will not allow them to deceive me forever. From that day on, the lives of Laura and James changed completely. Every day that passed was another day spent planning and collecting the missing pieces they needed to fight against Dylan and Sophie. But they could not do this alone. The lawyer they had met earlier had already begun searching for information, studying the documents connected to Langston Dubois's will, and working to prove that the papers Dylan and Sophie had presented were false. She had promised to help them, yet the process was not easy. It would take time to examine and gather all the evidence, and during this period, the patience of Laura and James was constantly tested. Meanwhile, Dylan and Sophie had changed their attitude. They no longer appeared as confident and powerful as before, and that was not a good sign. Laura knew they were preparing something behind the scenes. Their conversations often stopped the moment someone approached. Laura began to notice the smallest changes in their behavior, the secret glances, the careful words spoken when no one seemed to be listening. All of this only strengthened her determination. She could not allow them to continue manipulating everything. A week later, the lawyer called Laura and James and informed them that they had discovered several irregularities in the documents Dylan and Sophie had submitted. There were signs suggesting that the papers were not legitimate, but to confirm it completely, they would need to conduct a signature analysis and examine traces from the original documents. What do we do next? Laura asked after hearing the news. There was still a great deal to be done, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope. We continue the work, James replied. His voice remained firm, even though the exhaustion had not left him. Do not celebrate too soon, but at least we have some progress. Laura thought for a moment and then said, Then we must approach the people who have long been connected to the Dubois family. We need to find out who might help us verify these documents. It will not be simple, but we can do it. As time passed, the atmosphere in the household grew more tense with each day. Dylan and Sophie continued behaving as though they were still in control of everything. Yet Laura and James refused to let their arrogance distract them. Slowly, the couple began to realize that things were unfolding differently from what Dylan and Sophie had planned. They did not yet realize that although they had once locked Laura and James in the basement, in truth, they were now the ones being controlled. Late one evening, while Laura was preparing dinner, she received a call from the lawyer. "We have the results. The documents from Dylan and Sophie are fake. We can begin the legal process." Laura's heart sank for a brief moment, then filled again with determination. At last, after so many days and nights of struggle, the truth had been uncovered. She could not allow Dylan and Sophie to continue living in that deception. She would face them, and this time she would not step back. From that moment on, the battle entered a new chapter. Laura and James were no longer the wounded and helpless people they once seemed to be. They had become the rightful owners of the house again, people with the strength and authority to protect what belonged to them. And this battle, no matter how difficult it might become, was one they would never abandon. An entire week passed in silence, but Laura could not stop moving forward. Every day she and James spent time preparing for the great confrontation ahead. Although life seemed to return to its old rhythm, deep inside Laura's heart, everything had completely changed. She could not stop thinking about Dylan and Sophie, about the schemes they were trying to hide. The feelings of guilt and betrayal had not entirely disappeared, yet now they had transformed into a powerful force that pushed her to keep acting. At last, the lawyer brought Laura news that could not have been more encouraging. After conducting their examination, they discovered that the documents Dylan and Sophie had presented were forged. Not only were there unusual traces on the papers themselves, but the signatures also showed signs of being falsified. The tension in Laura's heart slowly gave way to a new sense of hope. Yet that hope could not fully replace the worry about what might happen next. The following day, the lawyer came to meet Laura and James at their house. "We now have solid proof that the documents are fake. Now we must act quickly," the lawyer said, her voice serious yet filled with confidence. "There is one more thing. We need to bring this matter to court and make sure they can no longer deceive your family." Laura looked at the lawyer as a wave of emotion rose inside her. "But what will they do next?" she asked, unable to stop thinking about how Dylan and Sophie might react. Those greedy people would certainly not give up so easily. The lawyer sighed, her expression becoming more serious. "They will definitely not surrender easily. They will do everything they can to protect their interests, even using dirty tactics to attack us. But do not worry, we already have enough evidence to defeat them." James looked at his wife, his eyes filled with support. "Do you see? We can win this. We have the right on our side. They cannot take everything from us without paying the price." Laura nodded as a powerful feeling rose within her. "We will not give up. Everything has already been decided." A few days later, Laura received a notice from the court. The trial date had been set. Everything was ready, yet she still felt a quiet anxiety in her heart. She could not deny that this battle would not be easy. Dylan and Sophie would use every trick they could to twist the situation, but she could not step back. She had lived too long in the shadows of sacrifice and worry, and now it was time to stand up, not only for herself, but for everything she and James had built together. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the house grew even more tense. Dylan and Sophie no longer appeared as confident as before. Their conversations seemed more carefully hidden, and from time to time, Laura caught secret glances passing between them. It was as if they could already sense that everything they had done would soon be exposed to the light. As the day of the trial approached, Laura felt her heart beating harder than ever. She knew this would be one of the most important moments of her life. She was not only fighting to reclaim the house, but also to protect all the values she had lived for over so many years. In this moment, she could feel a strength rising from within herself. That morning, the sky was clear, sunlight shining down on the house as if reminding them of what was about to come. Laura and James stood outside the courthouse, their hands tightly clasped together. No words were spoken, yet in their eyes there was complete determination and resolve. They were ready for the battle ahead. When the trial began, things did not unfold exactly as Laura had imagined. Dylan and Sophie appeared very confident, yet deep down Laura knew they were only trying to hide their worry. She could see it in Dylan's eyes, the uneasiness slowly beginning to appear, even though he tried to conceal it. Laura's lawyer stood up and began presenting the evidence. From the forged documents to the irregular details within the papers Dylan and Sophie had submitted, every word from the lawyer was like a sharp blade cutting through the confidence of Dylan and Sophie. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing moment. Dylan attempted to argue back, but every time he spoke, he only made the truth clearer. Each attempt to defend himself pushed both him and Sophie further into a corner as the evidence continued to expose them. When the lawyer placed Langston Dubois's will on the table and demonstrated that it was legitimate, while Dylan could not prove otherwise, his face turned pale. Finally, when the court announced its verdict, Laura felt an unexpected wave of relief rising within her heart. Everything had been revealed. Dylan and Sophie no longer had any chance to deceive them. They had lost. They no longer had any right to claim this house. Laura looked at James, her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of pain or disappointment. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude that he had stood beside her through every difficult moment. They had won. At last, justice had been served. When they walked out of the courtroom, the two of them looked at each other and shared a gentle smile, as if all the hardships they had faced were now part of the past. They had fought and reclaimed what belonged to them, not only the house, but also the respect and justice they had lost through so many years. After the court's verdict, everything seemed as if it had finally come to an end. However, the atmosphere within Laura's family was far from the peace she had imagined. Although Dylan and Sophie had failed in the legal battle, they were not the kind of people who would easily accept defeat. Laura's initial sense of victory was quickly replaced by a growing tension. She could clearly feel that this story was not over yet. They had won the legal fight, but the emotional and psychological battle was still continuing. Dylan and Sophie did not give up. They continued to come and go from the house, always behaving as though they had never lost. Laura knew they were still planning a new counterattack, once again using their schemes to seize the house, and perhaps even the power that the Dubois family had built over so many years. The next day, Laura and James received a phone call from their lawyer. She informed them that Dylan and Sophie were preparing to file an appeal, but this time, instead of relying on forged documents, they had shifted to different tactics, threatening and manipulating people connected to the family in order to pressure them into withdrawing their claims. "I can't let them keep doing this," Laura said as she hung up the phone. She could not endure it any longer. Even though they had won in the courtroom, the deception and greed of Dylan and Sophie were still there. The days of living in fear and tension had taught her one thing: if they did not end this completely, those two would never stop. James looked at her, his eyes filled with concern, but also a trace of confusion. "We can't keep fighting like this forever. They've already lost. What else is there to fight for?" he asked, the exhaustion clearly visible on his face. Laura let out a long sigh. "We have to do this for ourselves, James. If we don't, they will never stop. What they want is not just this house. They want power. They want control over everything. But we won't let them do that. They will not continue destroying our family." Although James did not completely agree with Laura's approach, he understood that without decisive action, the attacks would continue. The two of them had already lost too much to simply stand by and watch their enemies keep threatening their family. The very next day, Laura decided to meet their lawyer to discuss the next strategy. "She will have to help us once again," Laura said with determination. When the lawyer arrived, their conversation went straight to the point. "We will not allow Dylan and Sophie to have another chance to manipulate everything. It is time to take stronger action," the lawyer said, the sharp confidence in her voice making Laura feel more reassured than ever. "So what do we do next?" Laura asked. "We will confront them directly and expose the truth publicly. This is not just about documents or property ownership. We will make them face the truth about the Dubois family," the lawyer replied. From that moment on, everything began to fall into place. Laura and James, together with their lawyer, prepared a new strategy. They were not only gathering legal evidence, they were also planning to publicly reveal the story of Dylan and Sophie's greed and deception. Everything would be brought into the light, not only inside the courtroom, but also outside in society, so that everyone could see the true faces of the two of them. As Laura faced the decision to reveal every truth about her family, she felt a heavy weight in her heart. She knew this decision would not be easy. The consequences could be enormous, but she had no other choice. She would not allow traitors to take over her family without paying the price. More than that, she wanted others to know that the Dubois family had always upheld its principles, that they had protected honor and truth for so many years. Dylan and Sophie had no idea that in this battle, they were not the ones holding the power. On the contrary, Laura was the one who truly controlled the situation. Through wise strategies and unwavering resilience, she had gradually built a strong position that could not be broken. By exposing the truth, she would reclaim everything that had been taken from her, not only property, but also the respect and honor that she and James deserved. On that day, when every plan had been prepared, Laura felt as if she were standing on the threshold of a great transformation. Even though she knew this battle would be costly and difficult, she also understood that to gain freedom and justice, she could not avoid hard decisions. She was no longer the weak woman who had once remained silent and endured everything. She had changed, and now she was ready to face every challenge, ready to confront the hardships of this life. All the preparations were complete. The next battle would be the greatest test of all, but Laura was not afraid. She was ready to step into it. As the date of the second trial approached, Laura felt a growing tension in her heart. Over the past days, although she had tried to prepare herself mentally, she could not deny that a part of her was still anxious. The battle was not over, and Dylan and Sophie had not admitted defeat. Everything felt like a tense game where every move from the other side could cost her everything she had fought for over so many years. She sat quietly in the living room, her eyes resting on an old family photograph placed on the shelf. That picture, where the whole family once stood side by side, had once been a symbol of pride, proof of their love and sacrifice. But now, looking at it again, it felt like nothing more than an old photograph filled with deception. Dylan, the son she had once loved with all her heart, had turned this family into a battlefield. Yet she could not stand still and watch everything be destroyed. "What do you think they will do next?" James asked, his voice low, carrying a concern he could not hide. Laura looked at her husband, then turned her gaze toward the window where soft sunlight filtered through the branches of the old trees. "We cannot stay silent forever. They will continue to fight back. But we must be stronger. We must fight for what we have," she said, her voice firm and without a trace of doubt. James nodded. "Then we must prepare carefully. We cannot allow ourselves to be caught off guard again." In the days that followed, every step Laura and James took felt heavy. Each time she went outside and looked at the people around her, she could sense the coldness in the eyes of those who had once been Dylan's friends and colleagues. The relationships the Dubois family had built over the years now seemed to be cracking apart, and every step they took felt like another step toward the edge of a cliff. The early conversations, the promises about protecting the family's reputation, had now completely fallen apart. The day of the trial finally arrived, and Laura walked into the courthouse with her lawyer. Although her heart was not light, she could feel a quiet strength rising within her. This was not only a battle to protect her family, it was also a battle to prove that truth always has the power to overcome deception. She no longer felt like a weak woman pushed into the dark corners of life. She had become a fighter, and she was ready to fight until the very end. As she and James entered the courtroom, Dylan and Sophie were already there. They appeared confident, as if victory was already in their hands. But Laura knew that confidence was only a mask. Deep inside, they were afraid. The secret glances and forced smiles could not hide their anxiety. Laura knew that now they were facing a truth they could no longer deny. The trial began. Laura's lawyer, calm and sharp as always, presented all the evidence they had gathered during the past months. From the traces found on the documents, the contradictions within the records, and even the testimonies of people who had witnessed the deceptive actions of Dylan and Sophie, everything was brought into the light. While the lawyer was presenting the evidence, Dylan began to grow impatient. He interrupted loudly, trying to argue against the evidence that had been presented. But every time he spoke, the truth only became clearer. His words sounded almost meaningless in a room where justice had already begun to speak. Sophie sat beside him with her hands tightly clasped, her lips pressed together. Yet in her eyes, Laura could see the worry. What she had once believed would be a victory was now beginning to collapse. Laura could not help but feel a small sense of satisfaction, though it came from a long and painful struggle. She was no longer afraid. Dylan's words and Sophie's schemes could no longer shake her. When it was finally her turn to stand, Laura felt her emotions shift. She looked at the faces around the courtroom, the familiar eyes of people who had once stood beside her, but now sat there silently, watching this battle unfold. She took a deep breath and began to speak. My family built this house during the hardest days of our lives. We lived for each other and sacrificed for one another. But today I stand here to protect my family's honor, to protect what we rightfully deserve. Dylan, Sophie, you have not only lost justice, you have also lost yourselves. Everything you have done has now been exposed, and you can no longer deceive us. Her voice was steady and powerful, making the atmosphere in the courtroom grow heavy. All eyes turned toward her, and in that moment Laura felt as if she had reclaimed her power. Not just the power in this battle, but the power of truth and the courage to stand against those who once seemed impossible to defeat. When the court finally announced the verdict, Laura was not surprised that they had won. She knew that truth would always prevail, and in the end, those who deceive would have to pay the price. Dylan and Sophie no longer had any right to continue destroying this family. As Laura walked out of the courthouse, she saw James standing at the end of the hallway. They looked at each other for a moment, and in that moment, no words were needed. They had won. They had reclaimed what they deserved. And even though everything had passed, they knew that the Dubois family would always stand strong, never allowing deception and greed to tear it apart. After winning the trial, Laura felt a strange sense of relief deep within her heart. The long days filled with tension, anxiety, and deception seemed as though they had finally passed. Yet even so, deep inside she could not deny that a feeling of emptiness and loneliness still surrounded her. The things she had fought to protect, not only the house, but also the honor and values of her family, now felt like fading memories, like invisible legacies left behind. Although she had reclaimed everything that belonged to her, she still felt as though a part of her life had been lost forever. The court had officially declared that ownership of the house belonged to her family, and Dylan and Sophie were stripped of every right connected to the property. But even though they had failed, Dylan and Sophie continued to cling to their schemes. Even after being exposed, there was still arrogance in their eyes, as if they believed they could return one day and reclaim power again. Laura stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, staring at her own reflection. She was no longer the weak woman she once had been. She had changed. The years that had passed had taught her that family, sacrifice, and love were not things meant to be exploited. Even so, part of her heart still ached. What had happened to the son she had devoted her entire life to raising and caring for? How had Dylan become someone like this? How had she failed to notice the signs of change in her own son? During those days, Laura continued to stay in contact with her lawyer, the woman who had helped her through the legal battle. They paused for a while to recover and also to think more clearly about what steps might come next. But one thing continued to trouble Laura. Dylan and Sophie showed no sign of giving up. They had not lost everything the way she had once believed. One day, she received an unexpected phone call from an old friend, someone she had worked with for many years. He told her that Dylan had begun forming connections with powerful business partners in society and was preparing another plan to regain control of the house. "Laura, have you heard anything yet?" the old friend asked over the phone, his voice filled with concern. Dylan is not just trying to redo documents anymore. He is looking for ways to put pressure on society itself through his powerful connections. Something is definitely happening. Laura remained silent for a moment, feeling worry begin to rise within her. Even though the trial had ended, everything still felt unstable. Dylan was not someone who would give up easily. She had known that for a long time. After that phone call, Laura could not stop thinking about the situation. She felt as though she was standing at a crossroads. On one side was a broken family, and on the other was a truth she could not escape. To preserve peace within the family, could she forgive Dylan? Could she do something different to save the relationship between mother and son? Or would she continue fighting and protecting everything she had reclaimed? That question kept circling in her mind, leaving her restless. One morning, while Laura was preparing breakfast for James, she suddenly heard familiar footsteps coming from the staircase. She did not need to turn around to know it was Dylan. He had returned. As if it were inevitable, he could not accept defeat so easily. "Good morning, Mom," Dylan said as he stepped into the kitchen, his voice cold as always. "I have something I need to talk to you about." Laura did not turn around, but she knew he was standing behind her. "Dylan, I have nothing left to say to you," Laura replied, her voice firm. She knew that after everything that had happened, nothing could change the way she saw him now. "No, Mom," Dylan said, his voice becoming more urgent. "This time I did not come here to talk about the house. I came to talk about the family, about what you and Dad have done to me." Laura felt a tightness in her chest. She turned and looked at him, seeing the unbelievable expression on Dylan's face. He still seemed unable to understand that what he had done was wrong. "What do you think we have done to you?" Laura asked, her voice steady. Dylan let out a long breath, his eyes flashing with anger, but also something uncertain, as if he were searching for a way to justify his actions. "You would not understand. You always think everything is so easy, but you know nothing about my life." Laura stood silently, looking straight into her son's eyes. She knew that any words at this moment would be useless. "You have harmed this family, Dylan, and you cannot deny that." All Dylan could do was stand there without saying another word. The arrogance and confidence he once carried were gone. He had lost this battle, and now all that remained were the broken pieces of his family and the broken pieces of himself. Laura turned away and continued preparing breakfast. "You can leave now. There is no need for you to come back here again." Dylan stood there for a long moment, then finally he turned and walked out. Laura did not look back. She knew that no matter what might happen in the future, she had done the right thing. She had protected her family, protected its honor, and now she would continue living with that decision. When Dylan finally disappeared from sight, a strange feeling of relief rose inside Laura. She was no longer imprisoned by painful memories. She was no longer afraid. She had won. And in her heart, whether Dylan returned or not, she would remain strong and free. Spring had arrived, bringing gentle breezes and fresh air. Yet for Laura, everything still felt far from fully restored. In the days following their victory in court, although the house and its ownership had been protected, Laura still felt a deep emptiness within her heart. She could not return to the peaceful days she had once imagined. Nothing could go back to the way it used to be, and the perfect family she had once hoped for could no longer exist in the same way. She looked around the house where she and James had spent so many years together. The old photographs on the walls, the keepsakes collected over time, all of them told a story of sacrifice and love. But now that story had changed. Dylan's betrayal and Sophie's greed had shattered everything she once cherished. The pain and sense of loss had not faded, even though the court had declared them the winners. With all the changes in the family, Laura felt that she was no longer the same woman she once was. She was no longer simply the gentle mother or the self-sacrificing wife. Now she was a woman filled with resilience, a fighter not only for her family but also for herself. She had fought not only to protect property, but to defend her honor, her dignity, and the dignity of James and everything their family had built. One late afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight slowly faded away, Laura sat in the living room holding a cup of hot tea, her eyes looking out toward the garden. She watched the plants and the leaves slowly changing their colors. Inside her heart, everything also seemed to be changing, but not in the way she had hoped. She felt she needed to change as well, not only to adapt to the circumstances, but also to rediscover herself. A gentle voice broke the silence. Are you all right? James walked into the room, his eyes filled with concern. The two of them had been quiet for many days, as if an invisible wall had formed between them even though they were still living under the same roof. Laura looked at her husband, her eyes still carrying sadness. You think everything is fine now, don't you? She asked softly, though her voice carried clear exhaustion. We won. We took this house back. But why do I still feel so empty? James did not answer immediately. He simply walked closer and sat down beside her. We have lived in pain for too long. I understand how you feel, Laura, but now we have to think about what comes next. Laura remained silent for a long time, lowering her head as tangled thoughts filled her mind, making it impossible to find an answer. I think we are just too tired, James. Tired of fighting all the time, tired of having to hold everything together, tired of making sure that those who deceive us cannot take what belongs to us. But now that we have won, I still feel as if something is missing. James sighed and reached for her hand, holding it tightly. I know, but do you remember how we once talked about taking time to rest? About the dreams we had to put aside? Try to think about what we can do in the future, not about what has already passed. Laura looked straight into her husband's eyes, as if searching for something within them. I know, but sometimes everything still feels like a nightmare. Even though we won, the price we paid was too high. James said nothing more. He simply held her hand quietly, as if trying to give her strength. The two of them sat there together in silence, surrounded by a peaceful space, yet filled with unanswered questions. The days of fighting were over, but life continued moving forward. A week later, when Laura began to feel a small sense of peace returning, she decided to take a walk in the garden behind the house. Their garden, although not exactly as it had once been, still held a sense of freshness. The grass remained green, the flowers still bloomed brightly, as if proving that life always continues to move forward. She walked slowly along the small path in the garden, feeling each gentle step, and within her heart she slowly began to find her balance again. As she passed a cluster of roses, she paused and gently touched the soft petals. At that very moment, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned around, she saw Dylan standing there, his expression different from before. There was no anger and no challenge in his face now, only silence and exhaustion. He looked at her for a moment, as if searching for the right words to break the quiet. Mom, Dylan spoke, his voice no longer cold as it had once been. I am sorry, I was wrong, but I do not know what to do anymore. Laura looked at her son, sensing the pain and regret in his eyes. She sighed softly and stepped closer. Dylan, nothing is ever too late, but you must understand that this family cannot continue living in deception. Things cannot return to the way they were before, but we can begin again. You must show us that you have truly changed. Dylan lowered his head, his eyes filled with tears. I will, Mom. I will start over. Laura looked at her son and felt a warm wave rising within her heart. Even though everything had changed, even though the battle had not truly ended, she knew that her son could still change. And perhaps from that very change, her family could find peace again, not through victories and legal battles, but through forgiveness and the rebuilding of their bond. As they sat down together on the bench in the garden, the gentle breeze passed through the air, and Laura felt that something within her family had finally begun to change. Even though they could never return to the past, at least she had begun to rediscover a sense of peace in her heart. The whole family would start again from this moment, not with resentment, but with truth and resilience. Laura's story has come to an end, but her journey to reclaim truth and justice remains a powerful lesson about resilience and the strength of forgiveness. Each of us faces challenges and difficult decisions in life, but only by standing firm and fighting for what is right can we truly find peace and freedom. If this story has touched your heart, do not hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below the video. Let us know what you think about Laura's decision and whether you would be willing to fight for what you believe in, just like she did. Do not forget to press like and subscribe to the channel so you will not miss other inspiring stories. Together, we can spread positive and powerful messages because life can always change when we dare to walk our own path. Thank you for watching, and see you again in the next stories.